discussion, serious discussion, what will the international order be like? Before that, talking of Africa used to mean South Africa. After that, South Africa became anathema. In fact, it was sidelined. But Africa then came to mean former colonies. And it is those former territorial colonies that have been in the forefront of trying to force change in the United Nations. And they succeed through the General Assembly. As much as we want to be part of this, to have a voice, we need to realize that the big boys who have all the money have a habit of doing strange things if they don't think they should allow it. Point in mind, Western Sahara, the Sahrawi issue. The United Nations has been very clear, as far as I'm concerned. But who keeps it on the side and not making progress? It is France and the United States, funding and supporting Morocco for whatever reason, the aggression there. Can the United Nations do anything about it? It has tried. And these are not willing to budge. Recently, we had the issue of the Israeli operations in Gaza and Lebanon. The ICC claimed that it was going to indict the Prime Minister. When the people are indicted from Africa, there is happiness. This time, they say, no, in fact, you are going to be in trouble for trying. So, these double or triple standards are there in operations. Now, as a country, Kenya has tried its best. From the time of independence in 1963, it became independent with a reputation as a revolutionary country, the Mau Mau country. And there were expectations that it was going to be a revolutionary country, because it didn't turn out that way, but the reputation did not hurt. And that reputation might have helped it to gain advantage. The reason the Nairobi hosts the only UN offices outside the US and Europe is because of the diplomatic acumen of some people, exploiting the opportunities there. We had Odara Joey was very good at that. So that's the reason Nairobi hosts about 2 headquarters. No other country in the global south does that. So it used its UN positions very well. It has held positions in the Security Council about 3 times. I think the last one, which some people remember, with Martin Kimani making a name for himself, complaining about the Russians in Ukraine. And I think thereafter he got a good job. So there, what I'm saying is that in its small ways, Kenya has had some impact on the world stage. And it does not hurt to say that we are very good athletes. So if we don't do anything else, we know how to run. And so you have all the play of the national anthem regularly. So what I'm saying is that Kenya, more than many other countries in Africa, has had chance to make the mark and to have people raising questions or talking about it by design and sometimes by luck. But I think mostly by design in the past. Let me not go beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I know we could all probably stay for hours listening to you, but we don't have time, unfortunately. Something that struck me is when you said that for myself, that I've worked at the Security Council and the General Assembly, and one of the actual, you might call it, one of the arguments under the surface always in any discussion is the global South always want to have things done on what we might call an intergovernmental locus. So all the countries coming together to drive the agenda, whereas the global North will seek to use multi-stakeholder platforms or industry-led arrangements to determine the agenda of the discussions. But this is, I wanted to go now to Peter for a second, because often international relations is not just diplomatic relations. What really shapes the relations between countries is the economic relationships they have. And I know you've written and spoken about how trade can shape relations between countries. So I might just offer the microphone over to you to talk a little bit about that, Peter.
Well, thank you. It's difficult to speak after Professor. You know, he's covered the ground. I thank the organizers for this forum. What I'd like to bring on the panel maybe is some new thinking, right? And what do I mean by new thinking? Following up on what Professor has described, we are in a moment in history where the famous saying that the king is naked is happening right before our eyes. And Professor has given us the history of how the UN was formed. We know the United States of America played a great role and has continued to play a great role as a patron, if I may say indirectly, a patron of the United Nations system. And if you look at the value system that drives the UN, they are very much American, if we may call them so, or liberal system. So the new thinking I'm bringing on the table is the role of new technology and how it's going to alter the international governance system. And in this case, I'm looking at artificial intelligence. I think it's been addressed early in the morning. And I'm specifically looking at how artificial intelligence, or what others want to call digital technology, impacts on democracy. Because every country in the world keeps saying we are democratic. And if you ask them, what do you mean by being democratic? They say, well, we practice the will of the people. So if we interrogate the power of digital technology, artificial intelligence, on how people think and how people make decisions, is the world of the future going to remain democratic? Because we're looking at a possibility where one person seated on a keyboard somewhere can influence how Kenyans think, and Kenyans will even think they have made their own decisions, yet there's somebody somewhere else manipulating how they're making those decisions. So if we peg our evaluation on the power of artificial intelligence to influence how we think, number one, or to grant the power to the government to control how we think, number two, then we can see that obviously the future of the international governance systems is not going to be the same anymore. It's going to take after the image of whoever will control that artificial intelligence system. So in this case, we're looking at the competitions around the world. I think the US is ahead on this, China as well, and other powers are also coming into play when it comes to artificial intelligence. So in projection, we can easily conclude that the future of the international governance system will very much take after whoever will be the winner in the artificial intelligence technology. Then to conclude now with your question about the trading system, what we've seen has been the clamor from the South that the global trading system is rigged in its current format. We've had our leaders keep asking for the reform of the global finance system in the sense that we see the emergence of other actors such as the BRICS that are talking about alternative ways of trading without necessarily making use of the US dollar. And lastly, we've seen what I'll refer to as the non-government consequential actors. Meaning, if you look at X, it used to be called Twitter. This is a private initiative, company, profit-making, but it has great influence beyond United States, if you look at Facebook. So when we look at the future of the international governance system, I think, just to conclude, I'm looking at technology, especially artificial intelligence, the non-state actors, such as this big Twitter or X players, and then now for African agents in this. And this was, I think, addressed with the gentleman in the morning, is where do we place ourselves in the research, in the artificial intelligence value chain, if we may use such a term, and be able to leverage maybe the small window of opportunity that exists right now, that no clear winner is in control. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know we're quite stuck for time. I hope people will be able to contact the different participants separately if they want to engage on their different topics. One thing Peter, as soon as he said it, William Gibson said, technology is neutral, and as soon as it's used, it becomes political. So there's a kind of, how the technology that's emerging is used is going to be very important in shaping things. And I think one of the things this conference was about, amplifying African voices. And I think we shouldn't forget that the rhetorical high point for the United Nations is all those African leaders who went to the UN in the 50s, 60s, 70s. This was probably the high point of the United Nations. And if you go back, if you want to hear a good speech, these are the people who probably spoke better than any other humans have ever spoken about issues of humanity. And hopefully we'll get to a point where those African voices are once again leading the dialogue. And as Peter and others were saying, we're in this kind of volatile, uncertain moment, but that doesn't mean it can't be seized, and that also presents opportunities. So thank you very much to all the participants today. I know ideally we'd like to offer more questions out to the floor, but I think in the interests of time, we might just end it here, unless... So I will pass it over now.
And you know, again, as with the other sessions, you can be certain that we can have a 3-day conference on the topic before us here, reform of global governance, reform of the UN agency. But unfortunately today, even though I'm a scholar, I am just a timekeeper. And I'm a poor timekeeper because I'm 1 hour late consistently since morning. So now I'm trying to get back to being within time. So with those few remarks, I'm sure we'll have wished to engage with James. I wanted to mention that James runs the Interregional Economic Network. Only recently we had a seminar on the topic. We produced some knowledge, some policy briefs. Paul, in addition to working on all these matters, also works on Africa, Americas, Africa, Latin America, African Caribbean, which is a whole topic on its own. But without justifying anything, a round of applause to Michael and to our colleagues. And thanks to the audience for not posing questions. We have saved us a couple of minutes, which we intend to put to very good use in terms of, yeah. Thank you. Right. Okay, I think, of course, in the next, as we said earlier, this is the inaugural Amplifying African Voices conference, Amplifying African Voices for Strategic Action conference. When we meet next year, probably somewhere else, not Kenya, we'll make sure we have 3 days so that we have good discussions. But for now, I want to advise that we have 2 sessions, so they are parallel sessions. One session will be in a room right outside. On the right, I think is 03, This session will be led by Dr. Edward Kawezi. I believe I saw him somewhere here. Is he still around? And this session is kindly, in this room for that. So, Dr. Kawezi, while you are away, I announced very ostentatiously and in a big way that you are leading, chairing, moderating this very powerful session on our agency in Africa's peace and security relations with external actors. So this is a geopolitics session from a security perspective. So as we let colleagues on this session move to the parallel session, I would like to invite, and I will the provisions, anybody who feels like they want to listen to the security, peace and security issues, that will be your room. Those of us who stay here will work on, will listen to a session led by Dr. John Mahasi of Horizon Global, and this session is entitled Opportunities and Challenges for African Agency in Emerging Technologies, Artificial Intelligence, and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So essentially, this session is for the geeks, the people who are interested in matters ICT or digital technologies. And Dr. Mahasi, if he's here, he can come and lead the way. And we hope we'll recover some time. I can see my colleague and friend, Chris. He cannot move from here. Yeah. Yes. You can actually, you want to go and see, yeah? I think there's a colleague here, Robin Williams. I think you can, you can join us. Yeah. I'm almost thinking that I should take over Dr. Mahasi's role, but welcome, Robin, because you are here physically. Most of the other speakers are online. The IT team, can we confirm that there are colleagues online so that we can actually start? There is Seiram Avol. Is she visible? Yes. Tatiana is there, Dr. Tatiana Karayanis.
Yep, I'm here. I can't see you, though, but I can hear you.
All right. No, we are going live shortly.
Okay.
Robin Williams is here. Sauya Mbabazi must be online. She's in person. Where is she, though? Okay. And Olajide Julius Filuzi. So I think as someone finds Sauya Mbabazi, I believe we can actually start the session. Okay, so Tatiana, I think I was just panicking. Let's give them a few more minutes to organize. Be patient. We'll be kicking off shortly. Thank you.
just me and you. I'm good.
They thought you had abandoned shop.
No, 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 no. I'm here.
So I think they said there's one more colleague here.
Yeah, but she is not well.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. Use this one. Good afternoon. You know, I love storytelling, so I'm going to tell you a brief story before we get to the subject matter. I have an interesting technology journey. The first time I interacted with a computer, I was above 20 years of age, so don't laugh at me, you know. It's the truth, the reality of how it was. And I remember for the first time, there's something we called the disk operating system, DOS. If you look at almost all modern technology applications, they are still running on the disk operating system, only that we have created a graphical user interface. We have improved the interfacing between the primary commands that we send to the machine and the input we give for processing. Then after that, there came something called WordPerfect. In particular, there was one that lasted for a very long time. It was WordPerfect 1995. Then to carry on with my technology journey, and I think the technology team might be sabotaging my story, but for now, let me try to finish it. The next time I interacted with the technology at a personal level was when I got my first laptop. And when I give you the description of this laptop, you'll think maybe I lived in the same era as the Flintstones, but I did not. They are in a different era, and I'm in a different era. My first laptop was not a clone. You know what a clone is, right? If you are holding anything in your hand other than an IBM, that's a clone. That was how technology defined an original computer from a clone. So I had an IBM laptop, and as I've told you, it's just about 24, 25 years ago when I had this laptop. And guess how much memory that laptop had? It had a memory of 1 gigabyte, 1 GB. I mean, I should have kept that laptop to bring it to this meeting today here to help me articulate this story. But between that time and now, technology has evolved massively. We rapidly found ourselves in the Internet of Things, and if you go to 2-3 years back, every organization, I need a mic, I need a mic, I need a better mic. 2 to 3 years ago, okay, let's hope. Is it better or not? It sounds not better. Does it sound better or not better? It's better. All right, good. So now, 3 years ago, we went into the app madness, and every institution was developing its own app. We have as many apps now as there are organizations, and even more. But quickly we left that space and entered the artificial intelligence space. And if you look at the trend within AI now, is that leading corporations are developing their own internal AI systems. The problem and the challenge, or the quagmire we have, is that whereas we are solving the problem of plagiarism from an AI perspective, we are creating another secondary problem of not having sufficient data to inform advancement, rapid advancement of these AI platforms to become authoritative enough and valid enough to be able to run the kind of applications and information needs that we are looking at. Very quickly, we are looking at opportunities and challenges for African agency in emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, and the fourth industrial revolution. I want my panelists, and I know there are those who are online, to introduce themselves. We'll start with Seiram Avle. Are you there? Seiram? Now, I hope this is not a technology challenge, because if it's a technology challenge, we are going to only have one participant contributing to this panel discussion. So on this one, you need to bail me out on the technology side, because most of my panelists here are participating virtually. Tatiana.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I'm Tatiana Karyanis. I'm currently a global affairs and technology advisor at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you with us here. Robin Williams.
That's me.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the organizers. It's been a great event thus far. I'm Robin Williams, and I'm a PhD candidate exploring the implications of the Fourth Industrial Revolution on the theory and practice of diplomacy. And I'm also the interim service line lead at ACSUS in South Africa, managing the Center for Development Research and Evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm told one of our discussants, Ms. Soya Mbabazi, is unable to be with us because of health reasons. We wish her a speedy recovery. Pole sana Soya. Olajide, Dr. Olajide Julius Filusi. If you can hear me, introduce yourself. Dr. Olajide. Professor Sairam, are you with us now? Okay, I'm told you are...
There's a little bit of a technical issue, but I think I'm in the right room. Yes, I see Tatiana, so I think that's correct. Okay. You want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please. Very quickly.
Get started. Okay. I'm an associate professor in the communication department at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and I'm also a Global Horizons Fellow currently at the Swedish Collegium of Advanced Study. And my work is on many things, but on the production and uses of digital technologies across parts of Africa, China, and the United States. I'm mostly interested in how people imagine technologies, what they do to bring them into reality, and what the implications are for various things such as labor. Thank you.
While they're with you, give us some insights on this. What are the current global trends with regards to artificial intelligence?
So I will say I'm primarily not an AI scholar, so I know others who have been following these trends a little bit more. So Dr. Karayanis will probably speak more on that, and so I'll make sure that I'll defer the specifics of that to her. My own work has been, or the most recent project I've been working on, has been looking at the ways that datafication, right, so the processes that bring people into kind of the datafied world, how that has been taking place across the continent. And so I've been looking at what are the various actors, companies, countries that are involved. This recent project has been looking specifically technologies, so Chinese-related technologies, and their significance across the globe and across Africa. And that work looks at datafication at various levels, but also in conjunction with what we understand to be happening from various sources. So, where are everyday people, particularly those at the bottom of the economic ladder, where are their lives becoming datafied, right? And so I'm not talking about, large-scale computing projects at, say, government or, university level, but how does a regular person's life become datafied, right? And most of this is happening through very simple technologies, such as the smartphones that we're using. And so the majority of the affordable smartphones that are available across the continent come from Chinese companies, Chinese manufacturers. This isn't to say that this is not true for the rest of the world. So your favorite computer or your favorite device from Apple is also made in China. And so when I speak of Chinese technology, I'm talking about Chinese brands that are sort of entering the African market as Chinese brands, right? Not on behalf of a third party such as Apple or a different company. And so the affordability that, Shenzhen, which is where most of these technologies come from, is a key factor in this. And so low-cost smartphones are what the majority of Africans are getting online with. And so what happens there? So this project has been looking at various processes, such as, how do people sign up for things? What are the cameras that they are engaging with? So AI cameras, which is part of the question that you asked, are now commonplace on all of our devices. So if you turn your camera on, your camera will recognize you as so depending on what kind of system you have, the facial recognition allows the AI to identify you, right? Your identity. And this is facial recognition that has been going on for a long time. It's not a new technology. The only difference is that it is more affordable and in the hands of everyday people. Other areas of these applications include the daily applications that people need. So one of the most interesting cases we came across in this project was the financial apps that the majority of the people we interacted with were using. So this might be an app where you sell food in the market, or even you're just any regular office salary worker and you need a short-term loan. You go online and you encounter various banks. So we did this project in Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya. Across these three countries, there were multiple apps that were providing short-term loans and financial resources to consumers. These are all available on primarily Android devices. Android is a Google-owned or Alphabet, if you will, product, right? But these are on Chinese-made handphones. So there are two entities at stake here. So there's the Chinese-made native operating system and the native apps. Some of these phones come with these applications. But in the Google Play Store, you encounter additional ones, right? And in our research, we find that these financial apps come from various places. They come from India, they come from Ireland, they come from China, and they come from the African continent. So these applications are fronting as financial instruments that provide financial resources to the average African, right? One of the sort of scary things that we encountered was what happens in exchange. So when you open this app, because financial institutions within the various countries don't offer low interest, low amounts, these applications become more interesting and more attractive. And so for no collateral, for nothing except giving access to, say, your address book, you are able to get access to a short-term loan that you pay back. Now, when you consent to that, what happens is that the institution at the other end gets access to the contact information and that is embedded in your address book. This is true for all apps. But what happens after is what we found to be interesting and unique to the countries that we were looking at. So say you default on this on the payment of this small amount. In some of the cases, what happened then was people in these address books then breach of privacy on various levels, right? So first of all, a third party who I did not consent to me having the address book now has my phone contacts. Second, they are telling me privileged financial information about the person that gave them this contact, right? And so it was in these everyday interactions that this project discovered
Prof.
challenges to gamification. And so like I said, Tatiana can speak more about AI-specific challenges, including with the cameras that are embedded on these phones. But my initial abstract of the work that I do is to sort of get this information of the everyday ways in which our lives become datafied.
I want to redirect your thoughts a bit, Professor. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hello?
Hello.
I see you raised your microphone, but I can't.
I want
so
to.
You might have to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, so I want to redirect your thoughts a bit. We have just about 2 minutes of your time left, and in these 2 minutes, hearing your conversation, clearly you have answered part of question 2 that I wanted to ask. Who are the dominant players in this space? And you are saying from a device perspective, we are looking at the Chinese controlling the market. And from a software or applications perspective, we are looking perhaps at American global giants, at least from a mobile telephony perspective. So these are the dominant players within this space. Do you see AI and other technology proliferations as giving advantage to African companies to be able, or African enterprises to be able to break into the big space of data and financial flows space, maybe with regards to financial systems? Thank you.
All right. see looks, which is that those with the most resources control through either big tech, such as the United States through Meta and the others, or if it's the Chinese fund and through various kinds of also big tech, right? A lot of the AI developments are happening in open source, as recent sort of like the trend has been towards make some of this open source. But the dominant players remain companies and institutions that are quite large and are considered big tech, right? So a lot of the work is coming from Google, it's coming from OpenAI. These are all institutions that don't necessarily make their software as open. Some of it might be open source, but the majority of it is still within sort of an intellectual property domain. And so if we're talking global competition, the playing field is already not even. And so it's really hard to assume that because the technology has these advantages, that people who, or markets that don't already have a level playing field can enter and compete and have an advantage. So if we want to promote an African voice, I think part of it is strengthening some of the African tech entrepreneurial spaces. Some of the startups that are doing this work on the continent, sensitive to the needs of Africans, deserve support, right? But they are not getting the sort of support that their competitors in, say, Silicon Valley are getting. So a startup is not raising as much money as a Silicon Valley startup in order to be competitive. So if we want to be competitive, we have to look at some of the fundamental infrastructures of global finance that goes into global tech.
Okay, Prof. Sorry, I'll have to slow you down at that point. Thank you very much for your contribution. I think we are really pressed for time. The organizers have seen the challenge. Next time, probably we will do better time slotting to allow discussants to give valuable insights. Thank you so much, Professor. Yes, Dr. Tatiana, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Now, I want you to take 1 minute to, you have inherited a problem from Professor Sarah. I want you to take 1 minute of your 7 minutes to address that issue on the trends on AI before I can come now down to the specific issues that probably we had planned to discuss with you. So for now, just 1 minute. What are the trends in AI globally, and where do you see this taking the tech space probably in the near future?
Great, thank you. Well, if 2023 was the year the world took notice of AI, 2024 has been the year of global AI governance. So we've had 2 UN General Assembly resolutions that have been adopted on the principles by which AI should operate in global society. The recent Summit of the Future at the last UN General Assembly last month adopted the Global Digital Compact, emphasizing international cooperation on digital issues and knowledge and capacity sharing between the global north and the global majority. We've had a publication of a high-level UN report governing AI for humanity, which provided a slew of recommendations for effective multilateral governance of AI. We've had the emergence of international AI safety networks at AI safety institutes at national level and a network of AI safety institutes. The network has been created by the U.S. State Department and will be launched in November. And the African Union adopted an AI continental strategy, but with a 5-year implementation plan that, given the pace of AI developments, is, I think, woefully too long. And finally, we're gearing up for the upcoming AI Summit in France in February 2025, where the environmental impacts of AI are front and center.
Thank you. Sorry, we are pressed for time. So I have a mouthful of a question for you here. Where do you see opportunities for African enterprises in the 4th industrial revolution? What are the value chains of interest, and what value propositions can amplify African voices, including direct participation in global technology-driven commerce?
So, what do I have? 2 minutes?
I'll give you 3. Okay.
No, thanks. I think in principle, principle, there are a number of areas where African businesses can thrive. I mean, there's everything from agriculture and agri-tech, fintech, financial inclusion, renewable energy and green tech, healthcare and health tech, education and e-learning. I mean, there really, again, I say in principle, because there are challenges, and I agree with Seram's analysis that AI won't bring the kinds of advantages that we think it will, partly because, again, the playing field is already skewed. I think there are barriers and obstacles for African enterprises. First, there's the environmental and social impacts of these energy-intensive AI systems. They're very energy hungry. For example, data centers need a lot of land and a lot of water. So front of mind is how we make AI both socially beneficial for African communities, but also environmentally responsible. These are conversations where African voices need to be very much centered. There's also limited access to infrastructure, whether it's access to compute, access to energy, access to connectivity, all are still limited. There's a skills gap, a shortage of AI talent and training. There's an implicit bias in AI models, and there's limited access to financing. I think one area that I've been thinking about is the current conversations about the global governance of AI and how to harness its benefits really approaches this through a very narrow development approach. Capacity building, knowledge transfers from the global north to the global majority. And I think we need to broaden our understanding of the AI stack to recognize the broader infrastructures that are essential for AI, from critical minerals and critical mineral sourcing to development and deploying. And there we see that Africa makes a significant contribution across the whole AI value chain. No, it's not, the African continent is not just a passive consumer of AI products. I mean, this is really an integrated ecosystem, and I think we need greater African representation in discussions about AI governance, given Africa's significance in it beyond the critical mineral piece in the value chain.
Thank you very much.
So, just to say that I think we need to treat AI governance as a shared global responsibility, not just as a development project.
Lastly, in 1 minute, there is a way bushfires start and burn out. Do you see this AI hype kind of teeing off, having a sharp drop? Do you see the conversation continuing for too long? How does it look like if we are going into a conversation beyond AI?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. You cut out of the first part of your
Yeah,
question.
I said that sometimes a bushfire starts off and burns out very fast. Do we see the AI trend conversation becoming something that picks up extremely rapidly, and then within a year or two, no one is talking about AI anymore, we've moved on to something else, and what could that something else look like?
Yeah, I think it's a forest fire, not a bushfire. And I think it's already accelerated. The thing is that it's ubiquitous. It really cuts across all sorts of files. So I don't think this is short term. I think it has really built up momentum. The problem is it's moving. The conversations are moving so rapidly that we're all struggling to keep up. And unfortunately, as Professor Abla said, the cutting edge research is currently taking place not in universities, not in research institutes. institutes, but within big tech, and that operates very differently from governments and from universities. They move a lot faster, and so no, I don't think that the AI conversations are short-lived. I think the part of the problem is that they're now everyone is going to need to catch up in their own domains.
All right.
And areas of work.
All right. Thank you, Tatiana. Unfortunately, I have to cut you short so that we move on to Ms. Robin Williams here to give us a bit of insights on a number of issues. And we are saying, what are the policy and geopolitical silencers of African voices on the technology front? And we are saying, think inside out, from outside, inside Africa, going outside. What are the silencers of African voices in this space?
Thank you so much, John. So there's definitely a few pressing ones, some more noticeable than others, but I think the big one that we're seeing is the over-reliance on foreign technology, technological infrastructure by industries, companies such as Google, Meta, Microsoft, and so forth. And the irony of me saying Microsoft, we sit in the Microsoft auditorium. But we're definitely seeing that about 99% of Africa's data is flowing through those undersea cables. So that, of course, affects our autonomy. And then, of course, we have a lack of representation on global tech bodies. And Tatiana had mentioned the significance of 2024 in terms of AI data governance. And we see, like with organizations like the International Telecommunications Union, only about 5% of that is represented by Africa, which is, of course, a huge problem because it means that when they are sitting with policy development, they're not really taking into consideration the African context and priorities, which are, of course, important. And then the other two, which are kind of interlinked, I think, is the digital divide and access inequality, where only about 40% of Africa have internet access. Of course, internet penetration has grown significantly over the last few years, but it's still far from where it should be in comparison to the rest of the world. And not far from that is the economic barriers. In 2021, the African Development Bank had stated that about 1% of research and development funding comes to Africa. And that means that when African developers are working, they're working outside of the global ecosystem, and they're not able to contribute to that ecosystem, and therefore they're reliant on foreign investment, which also means that they are then aligning their work to the values and priorities of their foreign investors, of course. So, yeah, that's to sum it up.
What are the real socioeconomic implications for this at a global scale? This inequality, this isolation, you say, the organizations working in this tech space within the African space are working outside the ecosystem. What are the implications? Who are the biggest victims?
So definitely a loss of digital sovereignty and an economic leakage. In 2021, there was about $1 billion that was lost in digital services in Africa. And then, of course, the fact that, like we said, Africa's autonomy is being, I should say our African voice is being diminished in this space, you know, with that external undersea cables that we're using. And then the exacerbation of global inequality is, of course, growing. And that's not just when we talk about internet access, but as we mentioned, there are innovators who are being excluded from a global system and that are working in silos. And then the vulnerability of geopolitical pressures, and like we said, the host countries who are now feeling that external pressure to develop policy aligned to the home countries of the likes of Meta, Google, Microsoft, and so forth. And then if we look at the key victims, I'd say it's us as the youth, those aged 15 to 34 who are the largest part of Africa's population, comprising of 60% of Africa's population, but only have about 30% access to, those only have 30% access to the internet. So that, of course, leaves consequences of the reduced employment opportunities, education opportunities, and entrepreneurship. So that's, of course, who suffers, not now, but in the long run, of course.
All right, one last question. How do SMEs And the understanding of SMEs from an African perspective is not $50 million. It's really, let's talk of 50 million, between 5 million Kenya shillings to 50 million, and you can use a scale of about just 100 to convert into USD and see what an SME is like. How do they develop capability to harness the power of technology? Because really, the investment required, the research R&D and investment required for technology to power up African SMEs is a challenge. The challenge is that when systems are brought from elsewhere in the world, they are tailored to the specific commerce spaces that they are developed in. When they come here, you'll find the systems really don't serve the interests. How do local SMEs within the African space develop capability to leverage technology for success?
Thanks, John. Definitely not something I've explored significantly, but I think strategic partnerships are very crucial, and that's within Africa. You know, that's across universities, innovators, African corporations, government, and so forth. Because I think the issue of working in silos, that's a big thing in Africa. And I just on the plane here, making my way from Ethiopia, from South Africa to Ethiopia to Kenya, there was I noted all of the big developments and achievements that are happening in Africa. But we see that there's a lot of silos that are happening. And Africa definitely, we've been solving problems for thousands of years. It's something that's inherent in African blood. So I think that's key, partnership.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olajide. Dr. Olajide? Is he online? Can we see him? Are you muted?
He's online, but muted.
You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Check your audio settings, Dr. Olajide. Going once. Going twice. Hola? All right, let's give opportunity for one or two questions. If he manages to resolve the technology issues, then we will revert to him. Any questions for any of our panelists, either the one who is here or the ones online? Any questions? Doc, we can see you, but we still cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Very good. Introduce yourself very quickly.
Thank you very much. Dr. Olajide Julius Filosin from the Department of Agricultural Extension and Rural Development and Not of Agriculture of Northern University of Nigeria. Should I know?
Thank you. That is enough. In the interest of time, I will give you your first question. What is the status of technology adoption in agribusiness value chains in Africa, given that the continent is an agribusiness dependent zone?
Okay, can I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. The state of technology adoption in Nigeria, as stated by research, the adoption is high because in Nigeria we discovered that high price of food commodities is in vogue, and scientists in their capacity investigated that what could be the reason for this high price of food commodities. So the scientists now came up with the development of technologies using the smartphone, giving it to farmers so that it can help them. Because one of the problems they identified is that it is a problem of information asymmetry that's supposed to be getting to the farmers, but it is not inadequate. So they use technology to cover for this problem, and the adoption rate it was high. So the farmers they adopted it and they were utilizing it. And after it is being utilized, we still discover this problem of high price of food agricultural commodities still persists. there was one led to this study that, okay, what could be the cost, despite the fact that the technology is being adopted at a very high rate, and the utilization, the farmers are utilizing it so well. Now, what could be the problem? And we found out that one of the underlying problems is that there are some factors that contributed to, the utilization not to be high, because when we conducted the research, the utilization level was moderate, but the adoption level was high. But utilization was moderate, and we discovered that one of the reasons is that there are some factors that has contributed to that, and one economic factor, and which has to do with the income of the farmer, because for the farmer to make use of the technology, the farmer must be able to afford a smartphone that at least can accommodate the technology for their use. Also, the access to capital, that is the availability of capital, is also an issue for for farmers to adequately utilize these technologies on the smartphones. Then another factor we discovered is a still benefit factor, which has to do with after using the technology, what's the impact of that technology to the household? Also, the accuracy of the technology when it is being used for field mapping and planning. Those are factors who are considerably, because it is presumed that if the technology fits to benefit them, of course the utilization will be increased. Then another factor we found out in our study is technology enablers. The technology enablers concept has to be come from availability of infrastructure that support the use of the technology among the farmers. Also, for alternative power sources, as we know in Africa, there is a problem of steady power supply in Nigeria. So, it's part of the identified technology enablers that will influence the utilization of such technology.
Okay, so allow me to interject a bit. Dr. Olajide. My question is this: you have really looked at this problem from a marketing value chain management perspective, B2B, B2C, C2C platforms for information exchange amongst farmers. But how about the place of technology in value addition? Where do you see technology in value addition, particularly within agribusiness value chains in Africa? Do you see local enterprises participating effectively? Are we reducing food waste and glut during high production seasons? Are we getting value for money through value addition, or we are still exporting raw? And where are the opportunities for enhancement within these value chains? Thank you very much.
Yes, we are getting some values within the technology, because it is beneficial, but not to the extent that which the scientists expected, and even the people that consume expected. But the impact on the value chain addition that we have a business, of course, it's really doing well. Yes, it's beneficial.
All right. Thank you very much. What are the challenges with the technology adoption within agribusiness value chains, and where are the opportunities?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, by highlighting the challenges, one of the top identified challenges is the use of regulation. And this has to do with the protecting the farmers' information, because farmers, they are often curious to ask us where our information are going to, what are the policies that is protecting the information that is being supplied into the smart information system that is giving them feedback. So it's a great challenge. It's a great challenge. Also, the ecological threat that is being posed by the smart information system, that they keep acquiring and asking us what are the mechanisms put in place to achieve all the ecological threats and harm posed by this information system. There is given the feedback mechanism. How adequate and accurate are the feedback being gotten from this smart information system. Then also, of course, the problem of infrastructure. So those are the challenges
All right.
identified.
Yeah, thank you so, so much.
The opportunities.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Quickly, in 30 seconds. Opportunities in 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunities. According to our client base, it enables farmers to display their goods for farm storage by in the form of marketing, and also it gives farmers awareness with temperature ranges to affect production timelines. Also, it uses the technology to identify crop diseases and diagnose possible solutions. So
Thank you.
farmer remain and boost productivity, and helps them in sharing ideas, receiving desired information from.
All right, thank you, thank you, Dr. Olajide. I think now we have to bring the session to a close. Very quickly, any one or two questions before we give some terminal remarks? Any questions? Looks like, okay, yes. Where is the mic? Can we get help with the mic? Very quickly.
Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking presentation. I just want to ask the impact of technology, especially AI at the moment, on our democracy, on our peace transition, especially in Africa. Like I'm asking, like the reason being, there is a huge and massive kind of backlash or pushback when it comes to say ICT or AI can influence in a very negative way the electoral outcome. Remember, like the Cambridge Analytica like case when the deep fake or a lot of false information were passed to people like on their phones, which had to influence how somebody had to vote. So when it comes to Africa now, of course, it's 40% internet penetration, but those who are on internet, what is going to be the impact? And when we don't have the technology ourselves, we don't have like to control it. What, like how do you think we can mitigate the negative influence of them?
All right, yes.
Thank you so much for that question. And I can mostly speak for South Africa because that's where my research focuses on. But I think it really comes down to the citizens, because in South Africa there's been a significant push to uptake technology. There's a lot of work being done in the spaces of ICT, IoT, AI in various divisions, but there is still that resistance from the public. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I know in South Africa, or in my community, we talk about our aunts or our moms who follow WhatsApp fake news and they receive a broadcast message. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to work on and mitigate. Maybe my fellow panelists have a bit more insight into that. But yeah, that's from a South African perspective.
Dr. Satyana, Professor Sairam, any comments on the effect of technology, including AI, on sovereignty of state, governance issues, and how probably the discourse in the political space shapes up?
I can jump in real quick. I think this challenge is global. It's not limited to Africa. I live in the US, and this is a challenge we're dealing with. And I'm in Accra right now. We have elections, so it's global. I think my fellow panelist is right. It's two-pronged. There is a space for regulation. I think when I talk about China, people assume there's a direction I'm going to go in, but China actually has pretty decent AI regulation that controls what can be let out into the public sphere. There are penalties for deepfakes. There are limitations on taking people's likeness for certain things. And so you can argue that depending on the kind of government system you have, some kind of regulation can be targeted at this kind of sort of space. On the other hand, there's citizen literacy as well, right, which is what the South Africa case was bringing out, which is working with the public through public entities, whether it's through specific media organizations or non-governmental organizations, to help people. But the challenge is really tricky. It's really difficult. I mean, there have been a number of tests that have shown, it's really difficult to identify a deepfake from something that is actually real. So in the so-called post-truth era, this challenge is global, and it's going to take multiple actors: regulation, public literacy, in terms of at least identifying some of the basic misinformation. And a lot of disinformation scholars are working on this. We need to partner with them in the tactics that they use in other forms of media to help the public recognize and identify these things. And also not to be separate from the AI space, right? As much as I love the question to Tatiana, AI is an important part of my own work. It is important to understand what's happening so that we can be critical agents, right, as scholars with the public to sort of move, understand, explainable AI is important so that people can understand what is happening on the technical side at various levels and then we can intervene in these ways. I'll let Tatiana take over.
Thanks. I mean, just to double click on what Sarah has said, it is a global problem. Those of us in the US are all holding our breaths to see what happens in the US election next week. And as we said, as we say, this is the year of elections worldwide, so this is an issue everyone's grappling with. What's interesting is that conversations about the global governance of AI, I'm not going to say regulation, certainly the governance of AI, there is consensus that that AI needs to conform to universal human rights principles. And so that is probably the only point of consensus that I can see in these conversations, and that's across all of the various regional frameworks and national frameworks for AI that we're seeing. We have a very fragmented landscape, but also big tech, at least in principle, also subscribes to the universal human rights principles. So this is really, I think, the challenge of our time.
Thank you very much. Do we have any pressing questions? I want to close this session. Okay, just one. This last one here. Mike. Right here behind you.
This is the after lunch session.
Thank you. Just as an addition to what Satyan has done, just a wonderful presentation. I'm studying external interventions on matters of elections in Africa at the PhD level. And the very moment you talk about global governance, a question arises of who governs who. And that in itself creates a room for states to work towards a self-system. And I'm really looking at it from a point of policies don't make themselves. People will sit down and craft them. What will, at the international level, what are they going to do to ensure that, the set criteria, people have compliance, full compliance? Because that is one of the weaknesses of international law that we have. But of course, AI has done wonderful in the medical world. It has increased precision on matters of surgery and even in the manufacturing sector. And we have seen tremendous improvements.
Thank you very much. We'd like to bring the curtains down on this session. One is to thank and appreciate all our panelists. A hand clap for our panelists, please. We can do better. We can do better. We can do better. Thank you very much. My concluding remarks are this. Whereas a technology presents opportunity for emerging economies, including those in the global south, and I think it's just a fancy word for some of the reality that exists, it's also built on the same foundations of barriers to economic trade and participation. The reality is, if you are in academia, if you are writing for you are competing for an academic grant, you are up against maybe 30, 50 other people competing for the same grant. How do you enhance your chance of getting your grant funded? One, you write an excellent grant. Number two, there is a lot of political lobbying, and people will not accept this. So long as we are here, I ask how many lobby for these things, no one will raise their hand. But the truth of the matter is, There is no space that is not contested. There is no freely available space that is waiting for Africa to show up and occupy. The world is occupied, the commerce space, the geopolitical space, all the spaces are occupied. The only way that Africa gets its voice heard at any level is to fight for those rights, to fight fair, but to fight hard, realizing that we are trying to take what is already in another person's mouth, and therefore the courage that is required to do that is a lot. But otherwise, the trends are encouraging. We all have access to eco-technology. What we choose to do with that technology is what makes all the difference. As far as information and disinformation are concerned, as to who called who garbage and whose tongue slipped while he was trying to refer to that garbage, again creates a lot of controversy on how information is communicated and conveyed in the public space, and how hungry people are to stick to their alignment, but leveraging the mistakes made by others. I thank you all for your time and for your contribution and participation to this session. And I think with that, we call it a session. Thank you very much to those across the Atlantic and those within other spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we need to give a round of applause to the moderator. This moderator is a friend of mine, but I didn't quite know that he has moderation skills of this nature. So, you think you know someone until you see them in their element. You see them, performing, because he has helped us save quite a lot of time. And of course, some of the colleagues on the call, like Seiram and Tatiana, are long-standing, friends in the academic space. I've known Tatiana for nearly 15 years, Seiram we've been doing the same work 10 years plus. And it looks like in the AI space, governance is a big issue. So, the initiatives we take from today going forward might revolve around the governance of AI and emerging technologies on the global stage, in the regions, at the AU level, in the countries. I'm not too sure Kenya has an AI Act. I know that the AU came up with ICT policy. I think it's called ICT transformation or something. Mr. Wanyama wants to say something. He's been inspired. Yeah. Teknolojia Akili Munemba. I think that Munemba must be a really tough thing. Eh? Is it from Zanzibar or something? But I think we've come to the end of this session. We'll try and get our colleagues in the other session to join us, but let's continue the conversation. Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues, I think our colleagues who are in the peace and security, Africa's agency towards in the peace and security domain are making their way. I think what we are announcing now is that the parallel sessions that we are to have at this point in time, we are now collapsing them into a plenary session because we like to hear everybody and everybody would like to hear everybody. Except that imposes some discipline on our part. So I'm going to ask our colleagues dealing with the diaspora session to try and see if we can do it in like half an hour. Yeah. And then we'll move very quickly to the next session led by Winnie Rugut from University of Nairobi. So without further ado, I think let me introduce my colleague Blair. Okay. So Dr. Blair Proctor, you can also call him Professor Blair Proctor, as is the lingua is in the US. He's Assistant Professor of African History, Department of Black Studies, State University of New York, at New Paltz. He is, more importantly, Fulbright scholar at our center, the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Witwatersrand, and is also not only a colleague but a friend. I've known Assad for a couple of years. We've had not only lots of academic, intellectual work to do, but also we've had fun together. So I'm happy to introduce Blair, who is going to be moderator for this session. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Brother Bob. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the end of this juncture and for this panel titled African Diaspora as an Avenue for African Agency. And as the moderator, but it'll be more of a discussion, just more of a conversation. And for centuries, countless attempts of diasporic Africans returning to continental Africa, regardless of region, whether individualistic or supported through the government for opportunities to expatriate, some successful and other occasions for tragic failures. This discussion will center on African agency within the context of the African diaspora's contributions to development efforts across the continent. By empowering cultural exchange and structured engagement strategies that recognize their potential as agents for change, we can create impactful synergies between Africans' diverse populations, both at home and abroad, ultimately leading toward sustainable growth for all involved. And pretty much what will be discussed through this conversation is African agency as a theoretical framework or concept, also research and knowledge production within the African diasporic perspective, African agency within the 21st century, social and economic challenges, and also diaspora activism and advocacy. So we'll start with what is the definition that we could say from an African diasporic perspective of African agency?
1, 2. All right, how are you guys doing? I'm Assad with the African Center for the Study of the United States, and I'm from New Orleans. And I just want to say my social media is a bit tapped out right now, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. So I wrote a definition. African agency is the ability for the continent to chart its own course and to operate in its own interest. In addition, when I thought of this definition, there was a couple of quotes that came to mind. When I think of agency, or when we think of agency, there should be an immediate thought of power. And so I thought of the Frederick Douglass quote, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. But then there's another quote about power from Dr. Huey P. Newton, where he says that power is the ability to control phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. If the continent does not have the power that it needs to define phenomena, and that's one aspect of it. White supremacy, colonialism, and racism define so many things for us. So when we talk about decolonization, de-Westernization, it's really a redefinition of some of these terminologies. But not only redefining, there must be the power to make it act in a desired manner. And so when I think of that type of power, I think of military might, I think of economic might, as well as the cultural capital that Africa has been producing.
All right, thanks, Brother Assad. And we also have another professor who is also online. Can you please introduce yourself?
I guess you're talking about me. It's Rico Chapman here.
Yes.
How's everybody doing? Rico Chapman, I'm the Dean of the College of Arts at Jackson State University. I'm also a professor of history here at Jackson State, and recently a Fulbright research scholar at Wits University in South Africa.
Okay, fellow Fulbrighter. And also my late father was born in Jackson, Mississippi.
Oh, good. Glad to know that.
Yeah, so what is your definition of African agency from an African diasporic perspective?
From an African diasporic perspective, African agency to me simply means, in the spirit of Steve Biko, Black consciousness, in the spirit of Kwame Ture, Carmichael, Black Power, and in the spirit of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe and Africanism. So African agency to me, as we speak about this diaspora, I think we first need to start with identity and breaking down those barriers of ethnic divisions. Though they're there, if we look at ourselves globally as one people, I think that's where the agency starts.
Okay.
And I think this conference speaks to that. And I'm really appreciative of those who organized this conference and the two scholars that are presenting today and the other panelists, because as we look at moving Africa forward, those of us in the diaspora, I think we play a key part in that, just by knowing, one, that we are African also, and we have to get past some of those micro issues that stop us from seeing ourselves as African. So that's what I'll start with there in terms of agency. Make it psychological.
All right, because you took the words, I believe, right out of both of our mouths, because the follow-up question that I was about to ask is, are we African?
That's a hell of a question, my brother.
Are we?
Judging by the way we timed this program, looks like we carried something over, right? We learned. So.
Absolutely. Of course, that's my position. Of course, we have our various nuances in terms of identity. We in the diaspora, at least I'm speaking for myself, born in the United States, born in the Deep South, in Mississippi. Many do not see themselves as Africans here. So it's an educational process for sure. We have trailblazers who have taught us well that we are global people. So from that framework, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of our people seeing one identity with its various nuances.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, absolutely we are African, but I think we can also hold space for multiple identities. For some reason, there's this false dichotomy set up that if I say I'm an African, I'm no longer a New Orleanian, or I'm no longer a Louisianian, or I'm no longer an American. We hold space for multiple identities, just as someone who is from Kenya or South Africa can identify as a Kenyan or a South African without any threat to their Africanness. We too can identify as African. And I'd be very clear, because sometimes in the diaspora there's this idea that we somehow had to seek approval to claim as an African. My idea was this, is that we were Africans when the Europeans put us on those boats. We were Africans when we disembarked. We were Africans when we began to create our culture and on those plantations. So everything that we created was created by Africans, an authentic African culture created by Africans in the West, as identified by Carter G. Woodson. So the idea that we are not is problematic in many ways, but it's also the result of years, centuries of brainwashing and internalized white supremacy that sought to disconnect us from the continent. So anytime a black American says that they're African, it's actually a revolutionary act.
Yeah, and I would add on the point that when we talk about African agency, we have to understand the historical context of the Ma'afa, right? So the Kiswahili word, which was coined by Dr. Marimba Ani, who was, her government name originally was Dora Richards, who was part of SNCC, which was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee back during the Civil Rights era, in which she was a cultural anthropologist and sociologist in discussing and understanding what the African Holocaust was and is, also referred to as the Ma'afa, which means the Great Catastrophe. So oftentimes you hear for Jewish folks, it's referred to as the Shoah, for Palestinians, the Nakba, well for us, it's the Ma'afa. And it's understanding through oral tradition and understand the historical context of where we came from. And that over time, that there was not also a Ma'afa that happened through the diaspora, there was also a Ma'afa that was happening on the African continent. So, because I remember I talked to a student that I mentored who was actually from Kenya, and I had a discussion saying that, it must be lovely, knowing your history and knowing where you came from. And she says, you have to understand that we also, through colonialism, were dispersed. And there are certain aspects of our culture that we have lost as well. So it's not just from the diaspora, but it was also what happened internally. And I think that we actually have much more in common than different. If it was not the case, we wouldn't be here, right? So let's follow up with the second question of how can the African diaspora influence U.S. politics, shape policy decisions, or serve as a key point of engagement with stakeholders to support African initiatives?
Dr. Chapman, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I'm conducting research, a comparative study on student activism in the United States and South Africa. And in terms of influence and policy, just through my research, and I cover a 50-year time period from 66 to 2016, students were on the front lines of organizing and protesting and making things happen from even pre-60, even pre-civil rights, pre-Black Power, but my era is that 50-year time period. But my point is that students have demonstrated throughout history that they change the scope and process of the struggle in terms of their activism. And we've seen this in the civil rights movement, moving on through Black Power, the Black Arts movement, all the way up through Fees Must Fall in South Africa, Black Lives Matter. So in terms of agency and policy, I think it's in the hands of the youth, in the hands of the students. They're the ones who really get out and on the campuses and take it to the streets to demand change. We saw recently in the U.S. with students on their campuses making their voices heard for Palestine. So it's very important that the youth are involved initially, which history has demonstrated. They take it to the streets.
I like that. I think we first need to talk about the two diasporas.
Yes.
Right? So we have, as we define the old diaspora, those of us who are descendants of slavery, and then the new diaspora, and we're speaking specifically of in the American context, because there's Haiti is the African diaspora, Jamaica, all of Brazil, Colombia, but as Americans here, there's the new diaspora that started coming to the U.S. really mid 60s and thereafter. And strategically, I think it's very important for that new diaspora to be fully integrated into the old diaspora. And here's a reason why. In the 80s, when the AIDS epidemic was ravaging Africa, it was the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, who was advocating on behalf of the continent. Now, that kind of African consciousness has kind of gone away because the 90s came and there were some tough times for African Americans. As you say, it's kind of difficult to focus on the continent when we're trying to focus on eating or surviving some of the viciousness that we face. So, but the integration of the new diaspora, or the contemporary dispersal, as I like to call it, will into our infrastructure will then again help to put that back, put Africa back on the agenda for Black Americans. So I think that's one step we have to take. And on our end, it is making sure that we are embracing, the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, and Somalis who are coming to the U.S. And to try to navigate some very serious differences. I mean, we have been in the West for 400 years, and there are some things that there's just in the U.S. There's things that are just different, different perceptions and different ways we see the world. But again, I believe personally, once you're in the U.S., you have a common enemy, and that common enemy forces us to be all on the same team.
Yeah, and I would add on that we actually have to talk about the concept of global white supremacy, and also understanding that Pan-Africanism and African diaspora of the old and the new is not new. So we can go back to the Haitian Revolution, where Haitians, some came to Cuba, some went to Mexico, some went to Louisiana, New Orleans, and created more diverse African Americans, because there's not just one African American, where there's diversity even within African American culture. And also with the concept of Pan-Africanism with Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, the Black Star Line, the Go Back to Africa movement. So there has always been a multicultural aspect to Pan-Africanism, and understanding that there's not one way of looking at Pan-Africanism, because there were debates, right? And there continues to be debates, because we're multifaceted. Because white supremacy would say we're just one thing.
One homogenous group.
Exactly. So let's continue on within the concept of the 21st century of African agency, especially with the upcoming November elections in the US. So what's your thoughts of African agency after November 5th? What does that look like? Of course, we don't know, because we're not sure who's going to be in office. But what does that look like?
Again, it shows that we're on the same team, right? Like, if you're looking at what candidate will be good for the African continent, there's only one answer. What candidate will be good for African American people? There's really only one answer. And I'm not saying they're the best or will be. One is far worse than the other. Okay. What was
Krista Johnson. Hi, Dr. Krista Johnson. Yes, so could you please join in the conversation?
Do you want me to speak now? I'm happy to chime in whenever.
Yes, please. Yes.
Dr. Johnson.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Sorry to be joining late. I'm sorry. This is my teaching day, so a lot going on here. And this is the problem with the time zones. But I appreciate this conversation. Really, interesting and important. And I think something that will continue to be discussed. I was just going to add. Of course, I'm in Washington D.C. and I'm at Howard private universities, so sitting here and of course, with all the election buzz going on now. And I just wanted to add from the DC or the US perspective that a couple of things. So there was an interesting study that the U.S. Africa Institute in Los Angeles did on the new, it was actually a survey of the new diaspora communities and their engagement in these elections. And I think some of that data is important because one of the things that we really, as Assad said, we very much, kind of have, well, the African American community, the African diaspora community here in the United States is just so diverse now. It's, not really feasible to talk about just, the Black community or an African American community or an African diaspora. And so it's really, and our census and everything else tends to just kind of gloss that over and see it as one unified group. And we have different perspectives, but it was interesting, the survey of this kind of new diaspora that the Los Angeles group did revealed a number of actually similarities with the historic diaspora, if you will. There's an overwhelming majority who support the Democratic Party, an overwhelming majority who support Kamala Harris as the candidate. The primary issues that they see of really, kind of driving their decisions and driving their concerns at the moment were the economy and immigration. So there's some interesting, I think, kind of more nuanced data which is emerging now from the African diaspora community here, which I think we need to build on absolutely because we really don't know, kind of I think what all of these differences are gonna be. I think just kind of the larger point is that we have seen this new diaspora in the past decade or so, I would say, has really become much more politically mobilized and come into its own. It has politically matured. So historically, they tended to act, I think, like many immigrant communities where they really didn't want to engage in U.S. politics too much, and certainly not Black or race politics. A lot of that changed with the George Floyd incident, and then you saw those communities also mobilizing and engaging in agency around that. Here, again, sitting in Washington, D.C., people are probably aware of the President Biden's initiative, his Commission on African Diaspora Engagement, which at the moment has been, doing a lot of kind of discussion groups and talking to a lot of groups and doing several visits over to the continent and making those links. It's been a bit of a kind of maybe a feel-good session at the moment. We haven't really seen tangible policy positions that they're proposing to push with Congress or with this administration or even with a new administration, unfortunately, but I think that's hopefully the next steps. It is a relatively new commission, so we're hoping to see if that is going to be an avenue or a venue through which the African diaspora can directly impact and engage U.S. Africa policy. I also just wanted to kind of, I think, highlight, I think some of the things, because Assad's very right, that, as I said, the diaspora is just becoming so much more diverse. There's a proliferation of organizations and groups here, some of them, based on nationality. So you have Nigerian American associations, Ghanaian American associations, and all these other, groupings proliferating throughout the United States. So the real kind of question becomes, how do we come together and at least find commonality around a certain core, set of issues that we want to prioritize. And I would say also, I had written a piece about a month ago, which was, also just talking about how we need to be cognizant about how certain U.S. imperatives and interests, as well as African imperatives and interests, can have the effect of either courting or prioritizing certain constituencies within the African diaspora. And we need to kind of be cognizant about making sure that we work against forces that may serve to sow division and sow conflict among the African diaspora community. Not that we're going to, and I think, mean, one of the points that I was trying to highlight is that we are a bridge group, and to Azad's point, you know, the historic diaspora both have deep connections with the continent, but our issues oftentimes can be seen, tend to manifest themselves in different ways. So the historic diaspora has always been very, very concerned with issues of racial and social justice, with self-determination, liberation. You saw this in terms of the mobilization around the anti-apartheid movement, right? You saw this in terms of the End SARS movement, or the Fees Must Fall, or Roads Must Fall movement in South Africa. There are a number of issues where the African American community, or this historic diaspora, sees connections and ties with the continent. And those have been very successful. Black Lives Matter, you know, those have been very successful campaigns and initiatives that we can see intra-diaspora alliances really connecting. The new diaspora, of course, speaks much more with its power through its remittances and other things, sees much more kind of connections to Africa's more immediate and most contemporary, you know, imperatives of African development and just, you know, kind of trade and investment and really getting resources and money into Africa so that it can develop in the way that it needs to. So there's kind of multiple roles, I think, that many different groups can play, and they don't have to be seen as adversarial or contradictory. And I think we need to kind of find ways of managing that more, because I think you are going to see, again, you know, many groups, and I think, again, to Assad's point, the historic diaspora has a lot of experience through, you know, the Congressional Black Caucus, through any number of other avenues of understanding how to affect change and how to influence U.S. policy, right? And the new diaspora would do well to learn those lessons and to maybe listen a little bit and understand, okay, how is it actually that we can be most effective in terms of pushing our agenda in the United States, both in Congress, but even at a subnational level. I don't know if we've talked about that in this conference yet either, but just really the power and the importance of subnational groups on the continent and here in the United States, sister city partnerships and all the rest of that, of course, become, you know, really important avenues through which the diaspora can exercise agency and influence significant policy, significant exchanges and engagements, you know, with the continent. I'll stop there, but I'm happy to chime in some more.
Well, I'm going to play moderator right now. I want to bring up the issue of these diaspora wars that are taking place. And I'll frame it this way. It is, in many ways, it is not as disheartening as it may seem, because at least we're talking. For centuries, we haven't spoken. And now the internet has given us the opportunity to, and when I mean we haven't spoken, here's what I'm saying. Gil Scott-Heron, anybody familiar with Gil Scott? Oh, I guess not. Okay. Right, okay, so Gil Scott-Heron was a poet and a singer, and he was a revolutionary, right?
Will not be televised.
And he was on Saturday Night Live. I'm sure you guys have heard of Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live is hosted by Richard Pryor, who at the time was the biggest comedian in the world. African-American Richard Pryor. All black eyes in America are about to be watching Richard Pryor on Saturday Night Live. The musical guest is Gil Scott-Heron. The song he sings is What's the Word? Johannesburg. This is during apartheid, right? He is a song that's literally saying we are reaching out to our brothers in Johannesburg. Please tell us what's going on, because the news won't tell us. We are here for you. We want to fight alongside of you. I moved to South Africa 2 years ago, and I asked people had they ever heard the song and never even heard of it. Right? So we had not been communicating. So now the diaspora wars are at least us starting to have these conversations, tough conversations that need to take place, right? But at least we're talking. And furthermore, these diaspora wars are not taking place with Chinese or Pakistanis. It's only between these black people. So obviously there's a recognition that we are related, that we are family, and that we need to have this family feud or whatever have you, and then get over it and move on.
Yeah, and I would add to the point that, so I teach in New York, and I mean, when we talk about diaspora wars, then that can get really messy because I would say like half of my students would say that, well, my mom is Jamaican and my father is Nigerian, or my mom is Black American and my grandfather was from Haiti. I mean, I'm African American, I identify as that, but I have ancestries from Haiti. So it gets very, again, it goes back to the point of when we talk about the concept of what is African American, is very diverse. And it has always been that way because that's what the diaspora is that there's always been movement, whether it was involuntary or as the Ma'afa, as I discussed earlier, or by choice for better opportunities. But when we talk about better opportunities, is that really a choice from that perspective of leaving someone's home for out of, if it was due to war or due to other experiences. So I wanted to point that out, that when we talk about diaspora wars, you know, it might be, you know, this concept of Africans versus African Americans, or, you know.
It's so funny that we even.
It's more complex than that because so many of us have multiple cultural backgrounds of blackness, if that makes sense.
Right. And I have Haitian heritage also. And growing up, seeing images of Haiti or Jamaica, I just knew Jamaica was an African country. Like when I was like 6 years old, I thought, I said, gotta be on the continent, right? So anyway, I'll just leave it here.
Yeah, so at this point, we will wrap it up, and
thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Our colleagues Asad El Malik and Blair Proctor. You know, Blair, as you mentioned, is a Fulbright scholar at our center, African Center for the Study of the U.S. at Wits. And Asad is in charge of the Diaspora Project. I want to mention for colleagues here who are interested in matters diaspora that these two gentlemen and the lady who is online there, Professor Krista Johnson from Howard University, are foremost scholars on matters African diaspora. And so you do not need to read volumes and volumes of books or to read a lot of strategy documents and so forth. A Zoom chat with them will help you quite a bit so that you reduce the amount of hours you sit at your desk reading. And so all you need to do is reach out, and they're very keen to engage, which is a good thing. But at this point in time, I'd like to invite Ms. Win Rogut to, and I think you can just come along with Shem, who is on your panel. And we have one more colleague. This panel is entitled African Agency in Global Dynamics, Peace, Development, and Non-Alignment. We did hear out one of our speakers speak on non-alignment, Nicodemus Minde, in the morning. So we have just, okay, let me turn it over to Winnie. She knows what to say and do. A round of applause for her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wekesa. My name is Winnie Rugut, as he's rightfully explained. I'm a member of faculty at the Department of Diplomacy and International Studies at the University of Nairobi. For those who know the University of Nairobi, we like saying it's the mother university, right? I'm from a very lovely community of scholars and practitioners who are interested in matters of US-Africa partnership. So just like Dr. Wekesa, we have a very new Africa Center for the Study of the US, and at the University of Nairobi, and we are being, can we say we are being guided by the WITS team to grow, and that's how I'm here. Okay, so this panel, I know our sugar levels are, yes, we're just from lunch, but now they're going there, they're going lower. I want to keep it direct to the point. We want to talk about non-alignment, the question of non-alignment. And the theme is Africa's Agency in Global Dynamics, Peace, Development, and Non-Alignment. So the whole, from the morning, we've been talking about the question of Africa's agency and how African countries can leverage on their position to be more meaningful actors in the international system. And non-alignment offers a unique strategy in the evolving landscape. And as I was talking to my colleague here, somebody asked, is non-alignment, does it really work out? Does it happen? Are there countries that are really non-aligned in the 21st century? And so this panel discussion wants to hone into that conversation. And just as an introduction, we will have three panelists. The first panelist is with me here, Mr. Siteki. Mr. Siteki is a scholar from United States International University, and he'll be talking about a paper he's written on state agency, actorness, and global powers. It already sounds very interesting. And he'll be anchoring this conversation on the question of non-alignment. Mr. Siteki is also a scholar who writes on regionalism, international security, cooperation and stateness, intermestic politics, and the East African region. But most importantly, he's a scholar on foreign policy and Kenya's foreign policy. Nice to see you, Mr. Siteki. And then we have online, just to check if they're here, Dr. Bian from Eritrea. Dr. Bian is a lecturer, College of Business and Social Sciences, and he'll be talking about the question of non-alignment from an Eritrean perspective, where he'll be talking to us about a paper and a research is done on the European Union and Eritrea's development cooperation. Dr. Bian, are you with us today? Yes, this is a tech life. Okay, so hopefully, I don't know, maybe we could just check if he's around, because he was actually on call earlier on. As I go to Mr. Beyene from Ethiopia, so brothers and sisters here from the Horn, Mr. Beyene is a researcher and PhD candidate at Addis Ababa University, Ethiopia. And on this theme of Africa's agency, he'll be joining us to discuss the role of civil society organizations addressing conflict drivers and promoting peace building. Mr. Beyene, are you with us today?
Definitely.
Yeah. Oh, amazing, amazing. Thank you. We can hear you. I hope we will be able to see you. But for now, let's go straight into the conversation. And because you're online, let's start with you. Between five or so minutes, and maybe you could be kind and just keep our time, tell us more about your paper and anchor it on this question of non-alignment and how Africa can actually use this as a strategy. Is it viable in your opinion? And what, from your research, can be done to attain any form of non-alignment? Thank you, Mr. Beyene.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, for giving me this opportunity to present, my research finding on the roles of civil society organizations in bridging borders through peace building. Insights from Institute of Insights from Ethiopian Institute of Peace. So, allow me to focus on the role of this important civil society organization in bridging borders, especially between Ethiopia and Kenya. My major emphasis here is that on the conflict between Yangatun, Dasanich, and Turkana, instead of reflecting my point of view on the non-alignment one. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes, of course, of course.
Okay, thank you so much. So, here I would like to give a bit background of this Ethiopian Institute of Peace civil society organization. This organization, the reason that I chose this organization is that, the year 2005 in Ethiopian context has been it was a turning point where civil society organizations play an important role, especially in creating a very conducive environment for national election in Ethiopia. So following that, the government wasn't happy and came up with a restrictive law, the so-called the Charity Save Society's proclamation in the year 2019. So following this, when majority of the organizations shifted their attention to on development work and on service deliveries, it's only like very few, like 3 civil society organizations has been engaging on right issues like democracy, democratization, and peace building. So among these, one of the organization was this EIP, formerly called Peace and Development Center. So this organization was resilient and survived like this very restrictive proclamation. It's like because of by using its borders and also its personal connections and by mobilizing funds from the private sector, which is unusual in Ethiopian context. So, like this organization gradually become like the only organization or the sole organization like to be approached by donors like African Union, donors like that of IGAD, and donors like that of European Union. So this organization has done many peace building activities like between the border that has been shared between Ethiopia and South Sudan, and the border communities shared by Ethiopia and Kenya. So for now, I would like to give emphasis on communities or older communities who are on Ethiopian Kenyan border communities. So I would like to a bit talk about this Dasanaj and Turkana and Nyangato. So the main cause of this cross-border natural resource-based conflict, which is like based on resources like water, grazing land, and also fish stocks. So following this, this organization, what has done was came up with a long-term peace-building problems. These long-term peace-building problems, it turns conflict into cooperation. For instance, the IP, it came up with a 5-year USAID Peace 3 program. So its main focus has been like addressing the root causes of the conflict. So following this organization, what has done was like having an intra discussion or dialogue with the Southern communities like that of the Dasanich and Nyangato one. So having this intra-dialogue or intra-community dialogue, this organization came up with like establishing women's network. This women's network helped this organization to include excluded women to engage on peace building. Additionally, this organization finally came up with transforming conflicts through by working together with one Kenyan organization, the so-called St. Peter's Community Network. So this St. Peter's Community Network, they played a lot, especially in oiling the wheel on the Kenyan side with the Turkana community. So these two civil society organizations, they exerted their own peace-building attempts to create their own contribution in stabilizing the region or contributing for the stabilization of the region. I think the most important thing is that this organization uses or exploits the cultural positive sides of the Nyangato women. These Nyangato women, they use their cultural dances, their cultural music, for promoting peace. You know, when they promote peace, women, according to their culture, they are highly listened by their brothers, listened by their husbands, and even if they are turned into one basis, these women, they have a high capability to return them from the forest into their home for peaceful discussions. The same is true for the Dasanich women. So I would say, for the the interest of time,
Yes.
this Ethiopian Institute of Peace, it's played a lot, especially in strengthening connections among the local, national, and regional actors that creates peace in this Ethiopia border. Another important thing is that this organization uses women-led forums for intra-community dialogue or intra-community healing among the Nyangatum and the Dasanach women, and also by creating a bullying with on the Kenyan CSO side, they try to like creating peace or play a lot for the prevailing of peace by working together from both the Ethiopian and Kenyan side.
Thank you.
Additionally,
So thank you, Bayane. Your insights are very interesting because you are picking on a question, on the idea or the fact that non-state actors in Africa, particularly what I'm getting from you is from Kenya and Ethiopia, these borderland communities are able to hone in on these non-state actors, as you're explaining, the Ethiopia Institute for Peace and working with women and various actors in this region, are able to find their way of finding ingenious way like cultural initiatives for peace building. But just, I want, because your research sounds very interesting to the broader question of Africa's agency, and you bring out a very interesting point of non-state actors. These actors who ordinarily we yes, are important, but are not well amplified in the conversation on the Africa's agency. We look at it from a more broader perspective. And so maybe to conclude for 1 minute, in your own opinion, how can non-state actors play a part in enabling African countries to better strengthen their agency in their engagement with other global actors? As you conclude.
Okay, thank you so much for your insightful question. So, like, my study entails that these non-state actors, they are presumed by both the global actors in the domestic actors, especially who are in conflict. They presumed them as a neutral entities or a neutral actors. They didn't take side like from the parties who are already in conflict. So I think this gives them a leverage like to oiling the wheel and like to bring communities together. I think there was like a very good attempt like this attempted by this Ethiopian Institute of Peace that, for instance, talking about peace and like getting back to home, it will be nonsense like without like substantiating it or integrating it without livelihood activities. So they are trusted. So finally they came up with like subsidizing these peace building activities with livelihood. For instance, they provide like important equipment that are important to the communities to engage on fishing, the communities to share like resources. So the most important thing is that these non-state actors or civil society organizations presumed as neutral entities. So they trust to negotiate parties who are in conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bayane. And I know, Bayane, we know we will get back to you as the conversation continues, but let's hear from Mr. Siteki here, who is with us right now. And then next will be Dr. Bayane. I don't know if Dr. Bian, is here with us. He's not here with us. Okay, so we are just going to stick to Mr. Siteki. It's just me and you. It's a dialogue from here. Quickly, tell us about your paper. It sounds very interesting, but please, let's hear that non-alignment aspect.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear me. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll just go straight in. My paper focused on, because since morning, of course, this conference is talking about African agency. But for my paper, I tended to concentrate on state agency, right? So as a country, as Kenya, what role has it played in trying to push its agenda on the world map, or regionally or globally, in terms of peace and security? And just for background, so the paper is framed on Kenya's agency in relation to peace and security in the broader framework of African agency in regards to peace and security. So as a background, so from since independence, and of course I've based my paper on the historical accounts, and my good professor, Professor Munene, mentioned that there have been instances where Kenya has played a big part in terms of peace and security. And so for me, my paper was geared towards locating Kenya's agenda in terms of peace and security. So as a background, so from since independence, though it hasn't been viewed that way, Africa has always been a passive player when it comes to peace and security. And it has always been looked at from the global powers. And in terms of theory, it has always been looked at in terms of either realism or neoliberalism. But we have aspects of, before I get to the non-aligned movement, we have aspects of the AU playing a major role in terms of advancing peace and security both regionally and globally. And of course, there has been challenges. Of course, we have mentioned about them in previous speakers when they were talking about the challenges that Africa has when it comes to addressing the challenges of peace and security, and part of it has to do with capacity. But when, of course, the AU has been able to advance peace and security development within the continent, and it has been able to go around its challenges by collaborating with, say, partners who have been mentioned before, say now the AU, and of course, regional players. So we can mention that, yes, or rather my paper identifies that, yes, Africa has been able to advance its agenda when it comes to peace and security through the AU. And at the same time, regional organizations have played a part. Despite the challenges that they face, they've always been able to play a role in trying to raise their voice in terms of peace and security. Though it hasn't been explicit, but there have been aspects of it. And then, of course, regionally, when it comes to, say, West Africa, we have regional organizations such as the ACSUS, and we have regional powers like Nigeria, who have been advancing their role in terms of peace and security within West Africa, and at the same time, when it gets to this is better. Yeah, so in South Africa, of course, we've seen it advancing its role as a major player when it comes to peace and security in the southern region. And so, yes, there has been aspects of Africa playing a role within the peace and security architecture. And so my goal, of course, as I've mentioned, my goal of my paper was to identify how Kenya has applied its agency. And it sought to ask, rather than asking how the external actors have determined Kenya's peace and security, it sought to understand and ask how far and by what means Kenya has, as a regional state actor, been impacting on and conducting itself in the peace and security agenda. And so the questions for the paper went further to ask or try to unravel the key sources or areas of agency where Kenya has played. And now coming on to the non-aligned movement, the paper identified of course, in the morning we talked about, in the morning session we talked about traditional non-aligned movement. And here we find that traditionally in the non-aligned movement, Kenya was a big player, just as other African countries. Of course, now we have 100 African countries who are in the non-aligned movement, except for South Sudan. And going by history, even just before independence and just right after, Kenya was very pivotal, just as other African countries have been in trying to make or advance agency when it comes to peace and security. Of course, at that time, being a young nation, there was opposition, when the government had its policy of trying to be non-aligned, the opposition tried to move it towards the east. But the Kenyan government stood firm, and they say that they wouldn't be focusing on either side, but they will rather, if anything, if they were to partner in terms of security cooperation, it will be on their interests. And even when it came to purchasing of weapons, it was found that at some point it did seem to gravitate towards the West, but at the same time it stood firm and mentioned that their goal in terms of purchasing weapons from the West was in trying to meet its interests. And at the same time, when it came to another point in time where Kenya has advanced agency in peace and security is in peacekeeping. And here the paper identifies the peacekeeping operations that the country has been able to conduct since from independence up to this point in time. And of course, you are aware that Kenya has sent its security forces in Haiti to try and quell the conflict there. And so its advancement of peacekeeping has mostly been advanced within Africa, but at the same time elsewhere as well. And then, of course, its regional mediation. It has been talked about that it has always been at the forefront of trying to ensure that there is peace in Sudan. And of course, the peace agreement that Kenya advocated for in, or rather midwifed in 2005. So we find that there has been some aspects of Kenya playing a role in terms of advancing agency, and of course, the non-aligned movement from the paper stood out as an area where Kenya has played a part or raised its voice in peace and security. Yeah, so essentially that's what my paper was all about. Okay. Back to you.
You can hear me? Yeah?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Siteki. You know, the question of non-alignment in the present day, because I like the idea that you presented, the traditional understanding of non-alignment, the non-alignment movement. And the non-alignment movement, as we remember in the 1950s, emerged from a geopolitical, tussle of two powers. You had NATO, the NATO alliance on one side, and Warsaw Pact on the other side. And I think when we were putting together this idea of non-alignment, what was in our mind is that we are in another type of multipolar geopolitical tussle. Now it's no longer just two actors, we have multiple actors. And what came to my mind when I thought about this topic of non-alignment is that there are countries like Kenya who, quote unquote, say that they are non-aligned. Most recently, President William Ruto, when he was in the US and was asked, so is now Kenya leaning west or are we leaning east? And I remember he said, we are looking forward. I don't, remember that conversation? Yeah. Meaning that we are not trying to pick a side. And for me, what I'm thinking about non-alignment is, as a strategy, is it really viable? Can countries, Africa countries, really walk that tightrope in the 21st century as they pursue, based on your research, issues of peace and security? Yeah.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier from previous speakers, I think where we are at the moment, we are at a very pivotal time globally, right? There are so many issues that are happening. And Africa is being looked at as the next frontier.
Yeah.
And of course, we've talked about this for quite some time in discussions about the role that Africa can play. And one of the speakers talked about, Africa being that we have one of the largest youth population, globally. And of course, there's all that advancement within the Africa Union Agenda 2063. There's that whole aspect of pushing the AFTA agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
And just like the EU, Africa seeks to, trade amongst itself, being that we have this burgeoning youth population.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Africa has a part to play, and of course with the conflicts that are happening, and as I was looking into my paper, one of the solutions that Africa can bring, in the space of the conflicts that we have, going back to the traditional non-aligned movement, we had these middle powers, and middle powers has been advanced by Randall Schweller, that scholar, and he mentioned, or he talks about, he asserts that middle powers during the non-aligned movement, the traditional non-aligned movement, they were able to act as a buffer between the two warring parties, the East and the West. And so, for me, I feel like Africa at this moment in time can try and mirror the middle powers, right? And practice middle diplomacy, the way middle powers act. Of course, we are not middle powers, but we have a number of countries, 7 countries in Africa, that can be said to be middle powers. And for me, I can say, I can extend that and say that we should practice equidistance diplomacy, which is sort of like an in-between diplomacy when it gets to trying to, say, solve in the agenda of solving the conflicts that are happening globally, and even the Ukraine. At least we tried, but we should be raising our voice and trying to mirror equidistance diplomacy and trying to probably mediate, the warring parties within, both regionally and globally. Yeah, so I think that would go a long way in trying to raise our profile and our voice. Yes. Yeah.
So, because this can be a dialogue for 5 hours, we want to open it to the audience. The question of non-aligned movement, and not just the movement, but the concept itself of non-alignment in this century or in this season. Is it viable? Is it even realistic? Can we do it? I see a hand at the corner, so we start with you, and then we just give you a minute. It's not necessarily a question, it could be a comment, and then any other? Sawa. Let's start there as we conclude.
Thank you very much. Excellent paper. I like the idea of equidistant diplomacy. I think African governments are listening to you. I'll tell you why. President Ruto, when he came to Washington and gave that answer, what he didn't tell the journalist is that he had a senior delegation of his ruling party that was in Beijing, which actually landed in Beijing the very same day that the Kenya government delegation landed in Washington, D.C. It was a huge delegation, and it had very, very high-level meetings with different parts of the Communist Party of China, and quite a number of commitments came out of that engagement. So again, equidistant diplomacy. One part of the government is in Washington, the other part is in Beijing. So I guess some governments are listening to you. Similarly, Tanzania and China held a major military exercise on the eve of the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation. This was the largest deployment This was the largest Chinese military deployment in Africa since 2000. And we saw the People's Liberation Army bringing Chinese contingents, this time not from the naval base in Djibouti, but from mainland China, by air and by sea. That was a major demonstration of the PLA's growing expeditionary capabilities. Now this sounds a little frightening, right? But a few months before that, the Tanzanians and the United States engaged in a major military exercise, Justified Accord, which is the US Africa Command's second largest annual military exercise with African forces. So again, is the Tanzanian Defense Force going east or is it going west? It seems to me that the Chief of General Staff of the TPDF is listening to you, because clearly the Tanzanian military is practicing equidistant diplomacy. So I just wanted to make that comment. It looks like people are listening to your advice.
Already this advice is working. So thank you. Any other comment on the question of non-alignment? There's a lovely lady at the back.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for closing off the day. So a few months ago, I was at the US.
Do you mind introducing yourself?
Okay.
Sorry.
Hi, my name is Valerie Butelezi. I work at the African Center for the Study of the US at Wits. So a few months ago, I was at the US Embassy in Pretoria, and we spoke to the ambassador, and he said, in his response, when we were speaking to him, he said, the US only engages with people and parties if they are beneficial to the US, and they only engage with them if they are presenting themselves in a way that only benefits them. So I believe that, or not necessarily only benefits them, but prioritizes the goals or ideals of the US, such as democracy or whatever they claim to be their multiple goals and perspectives. So I believe that if these global powers that are seemingly dominant parties in global geopolitics are positioning themselves first, it would be remiss for Africans to actually use any narrative or perspective that is not non-alignment, because clearly you can't say I will align with the West because the West is putting itself first. You can't align with the East. The East is putting itself first. If you're aligning with one side, you're always going to be lost.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Any other? Yes, sir, at the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Mbuva once again. I think it was this year in January when Dr. Bob Wekesa led such a serious symposium in Uganda during the accession of the Uganda chairmanship to the NAM, if my history is right. And some of the issues that Museveni addressed upon assuming that office is how to deal with the current issues of actually emphasized on manufacturing as a key area to be able to put some of the African countries to a level where they can compete with the rest. Having said that, I've read another material where South African scholars make a clarion call to the African leaders to end issues of conflict and debt, because they find they are the key areas of attraction of intervention by external powers. Probably you could allude to issues of national and external sovereignty, because it's a wounding area. We saw the other day in Gambia, they were against ECOWAS coming in to bring solutions. So how are we going to handle our own issues, even belonging to the NAM, and we don't want to appear to intervene? And when we know that whenever peace and security is threatened, it interferes with the very element of development and the well-being of the citizens is interfered with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that will be enough for today. You want to comment on just the general ideas that have come up as we conclude?
Yeah, the ideas are good and they are welcome. And I think for me, just by discussing African agency already is a step towards raising our voices. Because we can't raise our voices without, you being there and I being here. We have to come together and discuss. And for me, I feel, of course, with this whole idea of non-alignment, I feel there should be a reconstruction of the non-aligned movement. And at some point, it was suggested that it should be called some other name. Can't quite remember the name. But I think we should move away, right? Just as one of our respondents has mentioned, we should move away from the whole idea of, aligning with this or aligning with that. We should be talking about another whole new organization. And it's funny enough to think about the non-aligned movement being nestled in New York, right? Are we really talking about, being independent and being, equidistant if we have the non-aligned movement, say, offices held at New York, right? So I feel when we are engaging or when you're talking about new non-aligned movement, we should be thinking of conceptualizing a new organization or a new entity, that serves the purpose that, it will draw us into the future. Yeah, because, we've talked about the traditional and now we're talking about non-alignment too, but now we should move away with the non-alignment and talk about a new entity. And I feel also when we're engaging with these global powers, yes, we should engage with them because we are in a multilateral environment, or rather we are moving into that whole space. And we should be looking at, just as one of our respondents mentioned about, if you align with the East, if you align with the West, the East is focusing on its own national interest.
Yeah.
And so for us, we should be very clear in our minds and in our engagements that we should be talking about our own interest, right? And if we are to, engage with these global powers, it should be us leading the charge. And then if they have to come in, they have to support us. So they should back us, but we should lead at the front. Yeah.
Well, I think that's such a nice way to conclude the idea that if we are to talk about non-alignment right now, it should, in the context of Africa's agency, then African will be taking lead. And so engaging with the different countries, when they're looking east or west, it should be first them and then others. So as we conclude, what I'm hearing from the crowd is this I've learned a new word, equidistant diplomacy, right? Equidistant diplomacy. Countries. Thank you so much for listening and giving us your time. We conclude there for this last panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Winnie. I think you did a good job in keeping it short, and I wouldn't want to, make it any more painful for you to keep sitting here and listening. I'm sure what you need is relief, therapy of some kind, in the form of a very nice dinner, followed with the possibility of a drink. Of course, this is Kenya, so wine is not very famous for South Africans here, but you can enjoy a beer. And to help us, I could have said plenty to wrap up, but I would like to just hand over to Dr. Kidiva to direct us to the place of therapy at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daktari. We are so glad that
all has gone well except for a small hitch, but that will not be repeated. The dinner will be where we had the lunch, Masai Mara, and for tomorrow we will move to the Strathmore Business School auditorium. Everything is being moved to the business school. And that's why I have the confidence to reiterate that everything will be fine in terms of the technological hookups. So the dinner will be in Masai Mara, and it is now. So that where we had lunch, yeah. So the therapy is immediate.